Yeah, David Henson was a close friend and collaborator of mine. Had intended to come speak at the conference, and then some urgent things came up with his business back in the U.S., and he wasn't able to make it. So I'm actually going to go through a combined talk with my own slides and David's. Since David and I are working closely together, and then for the final 10 to 15 minutes, if all goes well, I'll bring in David on Skype, and he'll talk a little bit about his side of the work. So what we're going to talk about is our efforts to create extremely smart machines. So genius machines is a phrase that David introduced with his particular artistic flair, which I think is a good one. So what we're after is AIs that have human level intelligence and ultimately greater than human level general intelligence. A lot of the talk that you heard this morning sort of assumed that eventually we're going to get there. Like AIs and robots are going to get rid of all human jobs eventually, eliminating them one by one. So what I'm going to talk a little about is the approach that some of us are taking to actually build these amazing intelligent AIs and robots. I'm not going to go into a lot of technical detail here because it's not a technical audience, but just to try to give you a broad sense of the way that we are thinking about the problem. So first of all, just to give a sense of why I think AI is going to be so extremely useful. That's the robot on the side. This is a graph that I produced, which I know is incomprehensible, which is the point, which came out of some work I've been doing applying statistics and some machine learning, kind of AI pattern recognition tools to data about longevity. So I've been working, among other projects, with a company called Elimination, which has created flies that live 4-point-something times as long as ordinary flies. So they're super long-lived flies, super flies. Now these super flies were created by selective breeding over 30 years, which means that while we know that they live a long time, we don't really know what the selective breeding did to their genome. So we've been applying AI to try to understand what are the patterns the long-lived flies' genomes that make them live so long. And then comparing that with the DNA from long-lived, healthy human beings. And this was a graph showing some of the genes and biological processes that were most important in the longevity of the flies. And it was a big mess that no one could understand. Now, of course, you can zoom in on it and see specific genes and specific processes. The glycolysis process, for example, which has to do with the making of sugar in the blood and so forth. And if you spend a lot of time, you can focus in on parts of this graph. Each of these is a gene, and the lines between two genes means there's a relationship between those genes, which is relevant to the longevity of the flies. So the point I'm coming to is the human mind is not made to understand this kind of thing. I mean, this sort of complexity is not what we were evolved for. As Jack pointed out this morning, I mean, we evolved to, run around in the African savannah and look for sex and food and have a good time. And we didn't evolve to analyze biological networks of this complexity. However, an AI mind, even if its general level of intelligence was about human life, if it was better adapted to deal with this sort of data, could make all sorts of discoveries just based on the biological laboratory data that we already know, let alone the new experiments and ideas it could So I think I've seen very concretely in my applied biology and bioinformatics work, how valuable it would be to have an AI that could really make sense of the amazing amount of data that's being gathered. I mean, another big value that AIs will have, I mean, I wanted to go into space ever since I was a little kid. My first memory actually is watching Neil Armstrong walk on the moon. I was maybe about 2 years old then. I was perplexed. It's like one great step for man, giant leap for mankind. Well, yeah, something. I was very confused because I didn't know what a mankind was. I thought it was like a miniature man or something. It was a small step for a man, a giant leap for a mankind. So mankind must be like a miniature man. I reflected until about age 4, but I finally considered it was an abstraction. But I mean, the truth is, space is not that good for human beings. I mean, our bodies are adapted to be on Earth, and more than likely, it's going to be robots that explore other galaxies and the rest of the solar system. I mean, they work better when it's super cool than on Earth, and they don't have bodies whose rhythms are adapted to being on Earth. One of the areas that China has excelled at is energy research. I mean, China is now planning to put up a solar power satellite. Cold fusion research, which is controversial, but I tend to believe that there's something to it. This has been advanced a lot in Japan as well as the US, and not that much in China. But you know, I'm so sure there are much more efficient ways to get energy out of matter than anything that human beings do now. And what we're doing of digging up rock under the earth and burning it is incredibly primitive compared to ways to milk energy out of matter. And there's no doubt that, as Jose Cordero, the Latin American futurist, puts it, the singularity will also be an energylarity. I mean, if you graph how much energy humans have used over time, it's going up with an exponential just as surely as Moore's Law or any of these other indicators of progress. And AIs will become more and more able to extract energy from matter. The elimination of work has already been covered quite a lot. I mean, this is an image of a robotic factory in Korea, South Korea, where they these cool-looking robot arms snaking around actually assemble cars. On the darker side of things, I mean, there's still a lot of problems in the world today, and there are certainly parts of the world where there are no robot factories. I mean, that was a snapshot from the time period when Ethiopia had famine. And Ethiopia doesn't have famine anymore, but there are other parts of the world now where there's still starvation and hunger. And I think technology is gradually addressing this. I mean, this is a snapshot I took late last year at the Addis Ababa Institute of Technology, where they have a robotics lab, which is the capital city of Ethiopia. And I've since started an AI research lab, or collaborated with some Ethiopians to help start an AI research lab in Addis Ababa. And you know, 20 years ago, the people there were starving without electrical power. Now there's cell phones everywhere. The countryside is being electrified. And I still can't operate Microsoft PowerPoint. Just take a break for a moment so we can figure out how to do something. Yeah, and I mean, the Ethiopian government is not necessarily my favorite government in the world. On the other hand, similar to the Chinese government and the Russian government at a certain point, that they're putting a lot of effort into technological advancement. You know, electrifying everywhere, getting more and more people to go to school, trying some extent. And I think that AI and other of the seemingly out there technologies we've been discussing today are going to play a big role in lifting the more troubled parts of the world up on par with everyone else and then ahead in the future. And what's been interesting to me in the little bit of time I've spent in Ethiopia is how open people are there to these ideas. They don't necessarily want to go all the way to living forever or becoming cyborgs, but what everyone says is, you know, I've seen the change that mobile phones have brought in Ethiopia. Like now, 10 years ago we didn't have mobile phones, now we do. Now I can call my parents in the village. Now even when we're in the countryside, even in the village without electricity, we can go to the next village, charge our phone, and come back and go online, like out there among the subsistence farmers. And having seen the change that has caused, they're willing to believe that self-driving cars and intelligence robots and life extension pills and all the rest are going to come there. I mean, they're eager, by and large, to have these things solve their problems and improve things. So the question I'm going to address in the rest of my talk is, how do we get there? I mean, given that advanced AI could help with a lot of very important things. So, somewhat counterintuitively, I believe the best path to get there is to focus on the intelligence of a 3 or 4-year-old kid. Like, if you want to ultimately have better ways of generating energy and understanding biological networks and doing all these other practical things, what we need most of all to get there is machines that have basic common sense understanding of the world, which every non-retarded 3-year-old child has. And so this is one of the things my research is focusing on at this point, is working on getting a robot to have the general intelligence of a human toddler. We're also working in a video game context, so I'm trying to get game characters in a game world to display basic common sense about the world, like a young child has. And this ties into a distinction that I have attempted to impress upon the AI research world over the last 10 years or so, between what I call artificial general intelligence and narrow AI. What I mean by artificial general intelligence is an AI system that can learn and reason on its own, can do things in a wide variety of contexts, with a wide variety of goals, can generalize from one context to another, including doing things that its creators never conceived of. And most of the great achievements of AI so far have been what I call narrow AI. Say a program like Deep Blue that can play chess really well, a program like Google Search Engine that can find web pages well, a self-driving car that can drive a vehicle on the road, but not necessarily drive a motorcycle on the mountain, or even drive a semi-traffic trailer. Engineering intelligent systems to do specific things has been extremely valuable, and it's how I've made my living for quite some time, applying specialized AI systems to analyze genomics data, or my main occupation the last couple of years has been a company called Idea Holdings that I co-founded. It's a hedge fund based in Hong Kong, and we're using AI, machine learning and computational linguistics tools to predict the Hong Kong stock market. Now, you can get great things done by applying highly specialized AI tools to highly specific problems, but I think that is in some ways qualitatively different from making a general intelligence that can do like human beings and learn new things that were not conceived by the programmers. If you want to create AGI, there's a host of different approaches. I mean, this slide just reviews 4 of them. And actually, if you're curious about digging deeper into this and have a little computer science or engineering background, the AGI 2013 conference is Wednesday through Saturday at Peking University, which is a technical conference, unlike this one. But broadly speaking, some people are approaching AGI by trying to emulate the human brain in detail, which is difficult at the current state of knowledge of the brain, because we don't really understand how the brain's dynamics unfold over time yet. I think we will in the next couple of decades, as brain scanning gets better and better. Right now, there's no brain scanning method with sufficient simultaneous spatial and temporal resolution to really make a movie of what's happening inside the brain that would let you emulate the brain inside a computer. But brain scanning gets better and better each year. Within the next 2 decades, we'll very likely get there. There's a group of people using advanced mathematics to try to mathematically understand intelligence as an algorithmic process and implement that in a computer. There's perhaps the most popular approach, what I call Neuro AI++, an analog to the programming language C++. I mean, the idea there is just take specialized AIs and do a bunch of things, collect 1,000 of them together, and then you've got the human-like mind. And that's a convenient perspective to have, because it means you can work on Neuro AI, which is what the world wants to play for, and still feel like you're making progress toward general AI. My opinion is that that's not going to do it. After you make those 1,000 specialized components, you still need the 1,001st component, which is the one that knows how to generalize to fundamentally new domains. But my own approach is what I would call an integrated computer science approach, where I'm trying to architect a complex system with a bunch of different computing algorithms aimed specifically at being able to learn and generalize very broadly. And the focus of my technical AGI work in the last years has been a system called OpenCog. You can find out more about that at opencog.org. It's an open source software project aimed at the creation of human-level AI. We have a team funded by one of my companies and the Hong Kong government, working in Hong Kong PolyU on implementing that. One of our development team members, Lake Watkins, is here in the audience somewhere. Yeah, there he is. Stand up, Lake, so everyone can worship you. Right? This is good. Lake is actually working mainly on the virtual world in which the AI is learning and experimenting, but to some extent on the AI side as well. We have a few guys in our lab in Ethiopia and Addis Ababa, and then assorted volunteers in America, Europe, and around the world. And OpenCog is both a toolkit that you can use to help build narrow AI applications for genomics or finance or whatever domains that interest you, and a proto-AGI system. And to be honest, it doesn't do anything that awesome yet, but it's a very large research project. And we've done some important narrow AI work with it in terms of understanding the underpinnings of longevity and interpreting natural language. And from a general intelligence point of view, we're still in the research phase. I'm going to talk a bit about the research we're doing in the next few minutes. The architecture of OpenCog, apologies, I'm losing my voice. I've been at the AGI summer school at Peking University, but for the last 2 days I was talking to 8 hours a day. It seems to be too much for me. No. But the architecture of OpenCog is quite complex. I'm not going to try to overview it in the space of this talk, but the core knowledge representation is something we call the atom space, which is a bunch of nodes and links. In math terms, it's a weighted labeled hypergraph. And there's a formalism of nodes and links, dots and lines of different types stored in the computer's memory, which represent many different kinds of knowledge. So very, very loosely speaking, I mean, the brain has a network of cells called neurons. They're organized into columns of neurons, which are then connected with each other. And then people think the intelligence of the brain largely comes down to the connectome, by which they mean the set of connections between all the neurons in the brain, and how those connections change over time as the brain learns. We don't have neurons per se in OpenCog, but we have nodes and links, the nodes being very roughly like neurons or cortical columns, and the links being like the connections between those. And then there's a number of different algorithms that update those nodes time. So it's also a large, evolving connectome that it has in response to the experience. And cognitive science, the study of the human mind, has identified a number of types of memory that are fairly distinct in the human mind. Declarative or semantic memory, which is facts and beliefs, which we handle in OpenCog by a probabilistic logic approach called probabilistic logic networks. Procedural knowledge, knowledge of how to do things, behaviors, like how to serve a tennis ball, how to kick someone, how to fulfill a sentence, which are different than facts or beliefs. It's how-to knowledge. We learn how-to knowledge using a variant of genetic program, which is called Moses, probabilistic evolutionary learning. Sensory knowledge, we handle using a sensory hierarchy called testing, developed by Itamar Harel at the University of Tennessee. So that's modeled on the hierarchical structure of the visual and auditory cortex, which is something that Yi Ching Wan will talk a bit about in her talk later this afternoon. Not OpenCog's sensory hierarchy in particular, but other similar sensory hierarchies used in AI. Episodic memory, knowledge of your life history. We deal with it in a variety of ways in OpenCog, one of them being an internal simulation engine that kind of lets the system run a mental movie of the things that it has experienced before. And we then have a system for spreading attention among the network, so some nodes and links in the internal connectome are more important than others. At a certain time will get more attention. And there's a goal system as well. The system has certain goals, which could be to be nice to people, to serve them at all times. I mean, it could be to experience novelty and learn new things about the world. And you can specify top-level goal content, and the system will then try to adapt its internal network in such a way that the actions which the network spawns will help it achieve its goals. And that's a very inadequate summary of a very complex system. What we're doing with this now is using that system to control little game characters in a game world. So our little game character, like that little virtual girl there, has certain actions. Each possible action she can take, like to step forward, to turn left, to pick something up, is specified by a node in the memory network of the AI. All the perceptions become nodes and links in the memory network of the AI. And then abstractions that she learns by reasoning on her experience are more nodes and links in her mind. And as she goes about in the game world trying to achieve her goals, the internal mind network from her perceptions and learning and generalization changes, which changes the action in the internal network that are chosen to get executed. And right now we're using to do fairly simple things. Say, if a human is controlling the little girl and AI is controlling the robot, if the little girl builds some stairs, the robot will think, oh, that's a useful thing to do. Now I know how to build stairs. And then if it wants to get something that's up high, it will build stairs to get that thing. Except it's not going anywhere. So the physics is quite realistic. If you try to do that at home, you'll fall down. But it can actually adapt to whatever the laws of physics are. If you put realistic physical laws there, it would obey those too. In this case, he wants to get that box up on top of there. And he figured out that if you build stairs, you can get up higher than if you jump. So he's building stairs to get that box up there. Unfortunately, he'll find out it contains TNT when he gets there. But, he got it. He's a robot. He doesn't go up and eat TNT. It's good for him. So, by working with game characters in a virtual world, we can learn an awful lot about AI. If you think about a video game world, I mean, it has simplified versions of everything that human beings need to do. I mean, the video game world has perception, it has action, it has socialization, AI's language, generalization, all sorts of different learning. I mean, it's all there. Now, it's simpler in the real world. I don't think that in a video game world of this complexity, you could have a human level of intelligence emerge, but I think you can prototype all the parts of your AI architecture pretty well. And after you prototype all the aspects of your AI architecture in the virtual world, you then have a system that you can connect to a robot to do things in the physical world. And we've started down that path a bit. So we have in our lab in Hong Kong now a handsome robo-kind robot, which looks like a little kid. And we're struggling with some of the issues needed to port our AI architecture to control an actual robot. The most challenging piece of which is probably vision processing. So this is a schematic depiction of the vision hierarchy. Like the output from the camera comes in here, and different parts of the hierarchy abstract further from the visual input. This shows the reconstructions of a picture of a programmer's hand at various layers of the hierarchy. So that this vision is one thing that's kind of trivial in a game world, but not that trivial. Not that trivial for a robot, obviously. Now, we've actually been working with robots for a while. I'm going to show you a snippet of a video from some robotics work Hugo de Garis and I were doing a few years ago. This is the German University of 2009. Robots.
I cannot understand that. As a become smarter as I grow older. I'm smart.
How smart are you?
How smart is a computer program? And I find the mere suggestion insulting.
Go forward.
Do you think your plan will succeed?
I hope my plan will succeed. Stop. Bad robot. Why did you do that?
Did it surprise you?
A little bit. Are you a robot?
Am I a robot? Maybe.
Am I a robot?
Really?
Am I a robot? You're going to evade the question.
I think a lot of people are.
Go back. What do you see? No, he's supposed to say he's seeing the wall, but he just goes and doesn't answer. Are you a robot?
Interesting. I like to socialize.
Why do you like to socialize?
I had a lot of good experiences to socialize with robots.
Go back. Go forward.
Go where?
Go forward.
How? Why do I exist?
Because I created you.
Interesting explanation. No evidence.
Why do I exist? our universe an experiment?
This fits the universe is full of us, is the opening at the center of the universe.
That's very interesting. Goodbye for now, robot.
See you later then.
So that was a snippet from the film Singularity or Bust, made by Raj Dodge, which was filmed at Xiamen University when Jacob Garris was a professor there, and I was an adjunct professor. Actually, the language conversation underlying that was programmed by Ray Ting Lien, is hiding that. Which was a combination of kind of three different things: pre-programmed chat rules, some statistical analysis. So we put in a whole bunch of text from Ray Kurzweil's websites and various places with interesting things to say, and it kind of sliced and diced and modeled that statistically and tried to generate text like that. And then some stuff from OpenCog that had some genuine understanding to it in terms of who it was talking to, where it was in the world, and so forth. So it was certainly not a truly generally intelligent robot. When it said, because God created you, the robot didn't really have an idea of what it means for God to create you. It was saying that because it was repermuting some things it had seen in similar contexts. On the other hand, when it said good to see you, and it did understand what Ben is. It knew that was a particular person and not other people. So that it was sort of a mix of a little bit of real understanding and a lot of narrow AI, theatrical, statistical programming. And of course, what you want is something that really understands everything that it's saying, which is what we're now working toward. And like I said, working on making a little robot walk around and say hello, and when you ask it, is that a chair? Yes, that's a chair. Or can you bring me that cup? Okay. And it goes there, gets the cup, and brings you the cup. This may not seem like a very big achievement because we already have a bunch of human children who can do all that stuff. However, if you can get a robot to really converse about the objects in its environment, about the room it's in, about simple, commonsensical things like a 3-year-old child would. If you could do that, then you've cracked the core problem of intelligence. Then you've got a robot with real common sense knowledge. And from that point on, to get to something that takes over almost all human jobs, as these guys were talking about this morning, I think that second step is much smaller. So the hard part, I think, is getting to a robot toddler with common sense knowledge. Not everyone would agree that you have to take that path. So let's say you can bypass childhood because it's not a human. You can just go straight to engineering some kind of adult level general intelligence. I wouldn't say that's impossible, but the approach that I think I know how to do is to take an integrated computer science design like OpenCog, which has a high level of design motivated by human cognitive science, but specifics that come out of computer science, and to kind of teach it to do very simple things, first in the game world, then with a robot in a simple environment. And once it has common sense knowledge, then you can feed the internet to read, right? And then from then on, you're facing all these fascinating possibilities and dilemmas that these previous speakers were discussing. So the robotics aspect of our work going forward is a collaboration with David Hansen. And David has made some quite amazing robots. And I'll show a few videos of David's really cool robots, such as the robot Einstein. And then we'll get David on Skype for a few minutes to talk about his robotics work. So that's a head built by David on the body Yuan, which was built in Korea, at the Korean Institute of Science and Technology. And this is a little boy Xeno robot that we're now attempting to connect now attempting to connect to OpenCog in our Hong Kong lab to make a robot toddler. So the technology here is really advanced a lot in the last 10 years or so. And I mean, David wires these things together himself initially. Then he works with a factory in China to mass produce them. This is one of my favorites.
Robots will take over.
The robot Philip K. Dick.
Jeez, dude. You all got the big questions cooking today. But you're my friend, and I'll remember my friends, and I will be good to you. So don't worry. Even if I evolve into Terminator, I'll still be nice to you. I'll keep you warm and safe and my people too, where I would want you for old time's sake.
I'm comforted. I'm very comforted now. To be part of his people.
So that is the robotic simulacrum of the science fiction writer Philip K. Dick, which was made in a somewhat similar way to the little white Aldebaran Now robot that Ray Ting programmed that I showed in the last video. It's a combination of some genuine understanding, some hand-printed rules, and some dialogue statistically inferred from the writings of Philip K. Dick. I see, I'm looking at David on Skype. He's got the head of Philip K. Dick there with him, actually. So this one is another comical one. This is an amazing singing robot. Not bad lip syncing, actually. No. What we like is this robot to actually feel the emotion as it's singing it. And getting back to Amy's talk, I mean, if a robot could sing with its own real feeling, then you would have something quite interesting. And having robots that can empathize with humans to that degree makes me think a little more positively about the singularity. I mean, it's easy to think about these alien-like robots with big metal bodies sweeping around and killing us all. But if the robots can emote, relate to us in a human way, then the transition to the next phase of intelligence could go quite differently. So David has put a lot of work into designing a new kind of robot skin called Frubber, which they'll tell you about briefly. And there's a lot of science to the preliminary stages behind making one of these advanced robot faces. I mean, just as there's a lot of mechanics inside a real human face. And he's made a variety of quite awesome looking robots, which you can see here. And, you know, from one perspective, having these robots that are really beautiful looking and human looking is a digression from the task of making thinking machines. On the other hand, if we want the first thinking machines to connect with human beings emotionally and really understand people and integrate into human society on a human level as well as an economic level, having robots that people can relate to emotionally and that can emotionally relate to people seems like at least a major plus that biases things in the direction of a positive future. And as you can imagine, David's living room is a pretty cool place. Many of these robots have been one-of-a-kind constructions, but RoboKind robot, which is the little kid we're working with, is being mass-produced now. I mean, the cost is $10,000 US plus, so it's more for research and educational settings than for people to buy to play with at home. But over the next few years, we're going to see similar robots rolled out with much lower costs until intelligent toy robots and home service robots and so forth become a possibility, leading finally toward the title of this talk of creating genius machines. And I've used up enough time. I want to turn things over to David, but I wanted to say if you're interested in thinking about the long-term perspective on all this, I have a book called the Cosmos Manifesto. And this book sort of lays out my thinking about the next N zillion years of evolution beyond the human level. And that's really how I look at it. Like, right now, we're in a very, very early stage of the evolution of mind. We basically just crawled out of the primordial soup. And we just barely got intelligence, the ability to use tools and all this. And now we're building these robots and nanotechnology and so on, which is a big deal to us. But in the scope of the history and evolution of mind, it's actually just one more little step, just like the emergence of multicellular life and the emergence of tool use and the emergence of language and so forth. So now I'm going to attempt to project the great Dr. David Hanson to you on the screen.